Right, afternoon everyone. So we are talking about limiting factors of photosynthesis today. Now this is a really important topic. It's an idea that we can apply to lots of different chemical reactions. So we're going to focus on four factors. There are more, but we're just going to be focusing on four that can affect the rate of the photosynthetic reaction. We're going to want to be able to identify about how these four factors can affect the rate of photosynthesis, when they're limiting the rate, when they're not limiting the rate, and how we can know that from the data that we're provided, and particularly applying that into graphs. So identifying about where in a limiting factor, where in a graph a limiting factor is having an effect and where it isn't. So because photosynthesis is a chemical reaction, it's therefore got a rate. And the reason it's got a rate, or one of the reasons that we've got a rate, is because it is catalyzed by enzymes. So remember, enzymes are biological catalysts that speed up a reaction without getting used up themselves. So pause video in a second and answer this question. So hopefully you immediately thought about the fact that light, and so here we could think about light intensity. We could also think about day length, along with color of light, would affect the rate of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide concentration, because it is one of the reactants, so more carbon dioxide means a faster rate of photosynthesis. Temperature, any chemical reaction is sensitive to temperature changes. Generally, increasing temperature increases the rate of reaction. And the amount of chlorophyll, because of course the chlorophyll is going to absorb the light energy in order for the photosynthetic reaction to occur. So what we need to understand is that when we're talking about the air, the carbon dioxide concentration is actually pretty low. It's about 0.04%, which is about 4 parts per million. So if we have more of the carbon dioxide available for a plant, then therefore a plant's going to take more carbon dioxide in. And if it's got more carbon dioxide, it will react more of it with water, and so it will produce more glucose. Therefore, we're going to have a faster rate of reaction. So more CO2 equals a faster rate of reaction. And so we can visualize that in this way, because down here we've got a single carbon dioxide molecule in the red, and that's producing one glucose molecule. Whereas if we look over onto the right hand side, we've got 3 carbon dioxide molecules, so that's going to be able to produce 3 glucose molecules at the same time. So temperature, here we're going to be thinking about the fact that increasing the temperature means that the particle is going to have more kinetic energy. If they have more kinetic energy, they're going to be moving faster. If they're going to be moving faster, that means they're going to collide more frequently. And if they collide more frequently, they're also, as a result of them moving fast, they're going to be colliding harder. So 2 cars colliding at 30 miles an hour versus 2 cars colliding at 60 miles an hour. So those collisions will be harder, and that therefore means that there's going to be more successful collisions, and so a faster rate of reaction. Key thing to remember here is that if the temperature gets too high, we know that enzymes become denatured, which means their active site changes shape, and so the reaction won't occur as quickly. Light intensity, we're thinking here about the amount of light energy that's falling on the chlorophyll. So if we increase the amount of light energy, that means there's more energy to be absorbed by chlorophyll, and so more energy to drive the reaction. So we can represent this down here with each of these little green ovals is a chlorophyll molecule, and it can absorb light energy, which we're representing with these yellow arrows. Of course, if we've only got a low light intensity, we've only got a few yellow arrows. So we're only going to be absorbing a small amount of energy, so we're only going to get a slow rate of photosynthesis. Whereas at a much higher light intensity, we have more yellow arrows. If we've got more yellow arrows, we can absorb more light, and so therefore we're going to get a faster rate of reaction. So more energy, faster rate of reaction, but again, like with temperature, we have to be aware that if there's too much light energy, that light can damage the chlorophyll, can actually bleach it. And you can see it sometimes on plants where they have kind of white spots on them, and that means that photosynthesis isn't going to be able to happen. Now, chlorophyll we know is found in the chloroplast. It's this green pigment that gives plants their green colour, and it is the pigment, and its job is to absorb light energy. And it absorbs light energy so that photosynthesis can take place, because of course photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction, so it needs to absorb light energy. If you have more chlorophyll molecules, then that means more light energy is going to be established. So we can tweak our previous model. Here we've got 3 chlorophyll molecules, 3 yellow light arrows, whereas over here, if we've got more green chlorophyll molecules, then we can absorb more light energy. More light energy means a faster rate of reaction, because there's going to be more energy to join the carbon dioxide and the water together. So if we convert that around, instead of thinking about how we speed up the reaction, we think, how do we slow it down? Well, if one of those factors, there's not enough of it, then it's going to stop the reaction from going as fast as it possibly could. And so it's a bit like the dog in this image here. We've got the dog that's got a harness around it. That dog could fly off and run at high speed across here, but it's being held back because of the harness that is around it. And so that image helps us to get the idea of what limiting factors are. Because a limiting factor is the factor which is in the least or the lowest supply, and so it's going to prevent the rate of photosynthesis from reaching its maximum. So it's a bit like this ball and chain is holding this person back, it's stopping them from moving really quickly. We take it away and they'll be able to run really quickly. So that's the limiting factor. So only when we alter the factor, when we increase it, can we alter the rate of photosynthesis. So we can use graphs to look at limiting factors, and on our axis, so on our y-axis here, we've got rate of photosynthesis, whereas on our x-axis we have the light intensity. So if you want to have a think about what the effect of increasing the light intensity is going to be on the rate, what kind of graph you might expect, you could have a go at sketching that out or thinking what that might look like now. So generally, a lot of people think that the line will be a straight line relationship because they don't think about the fact that at some point a limiting factor begins to kick in. So what we have here is that we can see in this first part of the graph, as we increase the light intensity, the rate of photosynthesis increases. Then, as we begin to increase the light intensity, it has less of an impact on the rate of photosynthesis until we reach a point at which the rate of photosynthesis no longer increases, despite the fact that we increase the light intensity. So that tells us a couple of important things, and this blue line is a kind of key separation on this graph. So the first thing that we'd want to think about is the fact that in this initial region we would be saying that light intensity is the limiting factor because, and this is where you need to consider why, when we increase the light intensity, we increase the rate of photosynthesis. So increasing the light intensity increases the rate of photosynthesis, therefore it is the thing that was stopping the rate of photosynthesis from going at its maximum, so therefore it is the limiting factor. Whereas when we think about the second part of the graph, then of course light is no longer the limiting factor here, and it's no longer the limiting factor because when we increase the light intensity, we see no concomitant increase in the rate of photosynthesis. So increasing the light intensity here does not increase the rate of photosynthesis, therefore it cannot be the limiting factor. Now, one of the other bits that you need to be able to talk about is about if you have a graph which has multiple lines on it. So it would look a little bit like this. So here we've got light intensity, so we can see that we're increasing the light intensity. We've got the percentage of oxygen in the air, so this is a measure of the rate of photosynthesis because the more oxygen there is, the more photosynthesis has happened. And then we've got 3 lines for the reaction occurring at different temperatures. So our first question that we want to consider is, in the first region of this graph, so where we've got this kind of straight line relationship for the 3 graphs, it's shorter for the first graph, slightly longer for the second graph, longest for the third, what would we say the limiting factor is? So the limiting factor in this portion of the graph is what we find on the x-axis, so light intensity in this case. The reason why it is the limiting factor is, of course, the fact that when we increase the light intensity for this first portion, the rate of photosynthesis increases. Now this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So for these two graphs, where we've got the flat line, previously we could say that light intensity was not the limiting factor because increase in light intensity didn't impact on the rate of photosynthesis, as we can see by this gradient zero portion of the graph, but we couldn't identify what the limiting factor actually was. This time we can, and we can identify it because, look, if I increase the temperature from 5 to 20 degrees C, what happens to the rate of photosynthesis? It increases. And so if it increases, that tells us that temperature was the thing that was limiting the rate of photosynthesis from reaching its maximum. So for this one as well, as we go from 20 to 35, increasing the temperature increases the rate of photosynthesis, not as much as from 5 to 20, but it is still the limiting factor for certainly the first part of this graph. And this later part, then it might be something else. So it could be carbon dioxide, or maybe we go back to light intensity being the limiting factor. So in your booklet, there are a series of graphs for you to have a look at and to analyze. So essentially doing what I've just done verbally in those graphs. And so across these next slides are the answers.